next up, we're going to have our first mini track of the event. So this is going to be on the state of network automation. We're going to talk a little bit about where we are right now in our own world. So I'll have Kirk Byers come up here. He's going to moderate this track for us, and he'll be joined by Howell from Equinix, Karl Newell from Internet 2, Nick Thompson from Worldwide Technology, and Urs Baumann from Swisscom.
Okay, so we are going to do a talk on the state of network automation, and this is definitely intended to be sort of an interactive panel, so as people have questions, definitely feel free to go to the mic, and I will try to interleave people's questions that they have. Try to not make them be like where you give your dissertation as a question. Try to keep it pretty straightforward and actually ask a question. It's possible I might summarize it, or I might try to convert it to a broader or more general topic if I think that's applicable. So at the beginning here, I'd like to just have the panelists give themselves a brief introduction sort of on their background, say their name, a little bit about themselves, and we'll go from there. Nick.
All right, can everybody hear me? All right, I'm Nick Thompson, principal architect from Worldwide Technology, part of our infrastructure automation practice. My background prior to my time at WWT, long time spent doing technology delivery, professional services, grew up in the service provider space, so automation has been something that I've kind of been around for a very long time. The last five years now, specifically focused on all things infrastructure automation every day, working with some of the largest companies in the world to help them solve the challenges that they have with infrastructure automation, as well as work with companies on trying to figure out a path forward and help them be able to get in the direction that they need to be from an automation standpoint as well.
Hi, I'm Karl Newell, network software architect at Internet 2. We run a nationwide optical and packet network for research and education. We are the preeminent research network. Please ignore my colleague Chris at ESNet. Sorry. We refreshed all of our hardware stack a couple years ago, and we were fortunate enough to have executive support to automate our network. And so I'm here to share my experiences with that and also learn from the folks here and what they're doing with automation.
Hi, I'm Howell, Director of Product Management at Equinix, traditionally a data center company, but I'm part of the digital services organization, and so we're highly focused on software-defined networking. My product is Equinix Fabric, as well as we have metal products and a product called Network Edge, which is like a VNF as a service. So essentially you can do everything that you did with space and power now software-defined within our data centers.
Hi, my name is Urs Baumann, Swisscom, Switzerland. I'm living the dream. I joined a huge infrastructure and automation project starting in Greenfield, so that's nice, Greenfield. Also part-time lecturer at the University of Applied Science with network automation. Yeah, and I love open source.
So let's start sort of at some high-level sort of business and process questions. So one thing I want to talk about with this respect to the state of network automation is what are some set of things we're going to do that we are doing currently that we're doing well. So I know, Dawn, you had done Fabric, you had implemented this, so you've automated services as part of that product delivery. You're also having your customers potentially automate using that. Could you sort of go over a little bit of like what you thought was successful there, how that was received by the marketplace, customer interest, that sort of thing in it?
Sure. So I really think APIs are key to that. So we're an API-first product and organization. That's how we interface with each other internally, as well as we make those APIs available externally in various forms, SDKs, Terraform providers, Pulumi, et cetera. So I think that's very important to our success.
And so at a high level, I was reading through a little bit of your guys' docs and understanding it better. So your service enables me, if I'm using your service, I can start building basically virtual circuits programmatically to connect a data center to a cloud provider, two data centers together, data centers to other. Is that sort of the use model that how people are using it?
Right. So it's really sort of network as a service. So I know that's kind of the new buzz term, but it does really allow you to programmatically or within our user interface, connect physical infrastructure to cloud providers. You can connect to anyone in an Equinix facility can connect to anyone else, and we're also starting to expand our services outside of that. So we have a new layer 3 product that you don't necessarily need to have physical space to turn up a virtual router and connect that router to your cloud provider or to a network provider that's available, et cetera. So that whole connectivity piece is sort of the center of the suite of services. So you can spin up your storage and compute on demand, and then you can connect to your network provider or connect to your cloud, and you can also spin up those virtual network functions like a Cisco router or a Fortinet firewall or anything like that, and then you use the Fabric product to connect to really anything else that you want to connect to within or between our data centers and even outside of our data centers.
And then I'll throw that sort of to the other people on the panel. So what are some things, like set of things that we're doing sort of higher level or process-wise that people think that we're doing fairly well or that we've made improvement in anyways over the last several years?
I think one of the things that we're starting to see more of is as products like what Equinix has to offer are available, historically, the network team, I would say, in the past, didn't really think about building an infrastructure in that manner, didn't think about creating the idea of delivering a network really as code from zero, right? And I think that as products like that have come out and kind of shown what's possible, I think it's also opened up the ability for people to realize that you can apply those same concepts to how I build and manage traditional infrastructure, whether it's in the data center or in the campus. And I think we're starting to see a pivot towards that, right? I don't think we're where we need to be yet, but I do think that as organizations are seeing that quick adoption in some of those areas, it's starting to come up of how do I do that elsewhere, and how do I get those wins across my organization?
Yeah, and in a similar note, a couple years ago when we started down this path of automating the network and making it software defined, we saw a lot of adoption on. So I represent higher ed a lot, and so a lot of college campuses getting to the cloud, and so it was really easy for them to adopt the cloud. They could go in, they could spin up resources, but they struggled getting to the cloud. They wanted layer 2 circuits up to the cloud. They wanted direct connect. And what we what we started thinking about is how do we make our network as easy to program as it is to get people to the cloud. And we're starting to get there. We have a portal and you can go and provision an L3 VPN to get you to any of the cloud providers. And so now it's getting to be almost as easy as spinning up those resources. And I think we're seeing a lot of positive feedback from our members being able to do that.
And so then sort of segueing a little bit less into what kind of processes, so there's a set of things that we are doing in network automation that seem to have been gaining at least traction and getting some amount of success. Like what are some of the processes that people are starting to do that are showing success in network automation? Like when you go, and you various people, when you go and see an organization that you think is going to be successful, and this could be your own organization, like what do you think like the key processes that underlie that?
Well, I could talk about one of the reasons we're successful with our efforts, and it's why I saw a lot of failure in previous efforts like this and other organizations. But we had our network engineering and our development teams tightly integrated. John had it, he had I can't remember what he called it, but that wall diagram where they're just throwing things over the wall, and that's where you see a lot of failure. But we met on a weekly basis. We didn't gather requirements, go off for 6 months, code something, then come back and say, here it is. And they say, well, it doesn't do what I want it to do. Probably because we failed to listen and they failed to tell us what they actually wanted. We talked every day, and I think that's key, and we're still tightly integrated. And I think anybody going down this kind of effort, they're not two separate teams. They're just it's a network engineering team with software developers on it, or it's a software development team with network engineers on it, but they need to be tightly integrated.
So now, Don, circling back a little bit on your product and your product rollout. So you have the interesting aspect that you had to automate it in order to deliver the service, but you also enable automation for your customers. Like, what kind of interest are you seeing from your customer base as far as like in automating that service themselves?
Well, sort of as Nick mentioned, many customers are moving out of their physical space and they are going fully virtual. So there is a lot of interest in infrastructure as a code and infrastructure automation, which is kind of where we play. So there's a lot of Terraform providers. We have several Terraform providers out there focused on use cases, so connecting to multi-cloud or those types of things. So we try to make our providers focused on use cases. There's interest in Pulumi. We have some SDKs. We did kind of get it out of that for a while, but as we've seen the interest grow, we've kind of focused back on that. So we actually have a team just focused on those types of APIs and making those available to our customers. And a lot of the large customers, especially the ones that do some of these activities repeatedly, are very interested, as well as partners who are doing it for their own customers, much like WWT.
So one issue that we struggle with a lot in network automation is the skills that people have. And this also segues into questions of like, should network engineers learn more programming? Should we bring software developers onto teams? How should we try to approach this problem of getting the skills necessary to perform automation? I guess I'd be interested in hearing like what people's experiences are in that, like if you've had more success doing one versus the other, what do you think the dominant patterns there are, and so forth.
I'll keep going. No.
Jump
both. My team, we were born out of our network engineering team. I'm a network engineer, and I was the first developer on the team. And we have two, predominantly network engineers that are now developers, and we've hired developers with a lot of development experience. And that was actually a boon too, because there's a lot of things we didn't really know what we were doing. We were trying to figure it out. It was great to bring in developers. And my boss, who's a long-time developer, on every meeting always says, I'm not a network engineer. He's always asking stupid network engineering questions, which are great questions. But it's good because they brought in the experience of software developers, and we bring the network engineering experience. I think it's you need to do whatever makes sense. I mean, if you have network engineers already on staff, then train them to be software developers. If you're hiring somebody new, probably bring in a software developer. You can train that. You can teach them network engineering. It's kind of whatever makes sense. But one thing is, I think what's key is don't leave anybody behind at your organization. Don't just make everything software development. Keep your network engineers and train them up. They'll be able to do the job.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've seen a lot of working with just a variety of organizations is that historically there was always this mindset that automation needed to be a team, and it kind of lived off to the side, and it did its thing, and you'd lob, kind of like what he showed in the prior presentation, you just chuck something over the wall and hope they would pick it up and run with it. And what we're really seeing is organizations that are successful, and ourselves as well, the way that we deliver automation is we have to up-level the skills of everybody. And there's going to be this idea that I have to level set as a capability across the entire organization what it means to work in a kind of automation first environment, which I think for a lot of historical network engineers, one of the hard things to deal with is that it's elevating beyond the idea that I have scripts that do something, right? We talk a lot about get rid of the idea of a script from your drop the script language from your vernacular. This is software development, right? We are writing software to manage and provision and operate our networks and our infrastructure, and adopting software development lifecycle best practices and learning how to do that is a new skill. So meeting your teams where they're at, level setting everybody, knowing that not everybody is going to want to do it or be involved with it, and that's okay. But what we have found is that organizations and their networks are extremely complex, and to say I'm just going to have software developers that are going to go automate this network can be very difficult, because these are extremely complex, very large, highly scaled networks that you do need that network engineering mindset. And so I think that best of both is really where it's at. But success comes in making sure that you have this kind of community of practice where you have network engineers that are picking up a new craft and focusing their efforts that way, because success will come by being a network engineer and learning the development in the long run, I believe.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's also important to find the same language. A network engineer needs to have a basic knowledge of on software engineering, and a software engineer needs to understand the basic of network, because otherwise they have different languages. I saw many projects where people are talking about templates or about tests or about functions, and they were completely talking about different stuff. And so building up a known language or understanding for each other and build up a whole team. I think it's important to not treat automation like a side business, like if I have time I do some scripting, but really like building this up in the team.
Yeah, so segueing into that a little bit. So I know we sort of conducted a survey before this, and we had a pretty good participation rate in it. So we got about 215, 220 responses. And one of the things that was a little bit surprising or maybe slightly disheartening in the survey was sort of the lack of adoption of CI/CD. And I know this integrates or relates to the discussion we had about abandoning the term script, thinking about this in a systematic way. So what kind of things do you think need to be done or should be done to try to convince people that if you really want sustainable software projects, that these are some roads you need to go down? Or maybe I'll flip that back on its head as like, if we want sustainable projects, what are some steps that we need to do to make these last and be viable and valuable to the organization in the long run?
I think we really need to treat the network automation as a product. We really need to see how can we bring this, how can we have this business critical or business relevant, and also how can we maintain. We should really try to not have single points of knowledges. We need to have broad teams who really can work together. And I think you brought the term automation first, so it really needs to be key value to have the automation. We have to stop thinking about automation as a helper function or something.
And I think to build on that, one of the things in the survey that was really interesting as well was we had asked a question of, if you make changes in your infrastructure, do you allow them via automation or via CLI? And the kind of follow-on was, do you lock people out of the CLI? And what we found is, of the 220-ish responses that we got on the survey, nearly everybody still allows CLI-based change to their infrastructure, right? So if you're going to treat network automation as a product, if you are going to drive an automation-first capability and strategy, the first thing that you're going to run into issues with is that now at some point I have to reconcile my source of truth with the infrastructure. Because if the infrastructure itself is the source of truth, right, it becomes very hard to automate at scale. So I think that there's some interesting things that we saw in that data where there's probably a longer way to go as far as getting network engineers comfortable with the idea that the behavior of a piece of kit, whether it's a router or a switch, whatever it's doing because a source of truth or some intent database has defined what it's supposed to do, versus whatever it's running and performing at that time is its known good configuration. And I think that's going to be a big key to continuing to unlock this, is getting people on board with that mindset that the source of truth can't be the network itself.
I think we probably need something like a maturity model and like a roadmap to progression. Because thinking about it, if you were to take a fledgling team and tell them that they, talk to them about CI/CD and test-driven development, they're probably going to struggle for a long time, or they're going to be overwhelmed. So you have to work towards it, and you can see the benefits once you get there, but you cannot see them right when you first start looking at, test-driven development and CI/CD. It's just really challenging. So I think we have to have a way to build people up. Well, yes, it is going to start at scripting, and then you're going to progress a little bit. You're going to build a slightly better software product, and then you're going to start. Then now you can introduce testing. Now you'll see the benefits of testing. Then a full CI/CD and full integration testing. So again, I think we need to make sure we have a path forward for people to get there. Help them where to start, and here's the end goal, so they can at least see what they're working towards.
So like adding on to that or expanding on that. So if you are in a team where you're sort of doing the scripting word, what steps do you think would be successful? Like if you want to systematize your automation, like where do you think a team should try to go, or what things should they be proceeding to if you're in that sort of, we run scripts on our network, but we don't really have any integrated system that's doing automation?
I think, normally you say you have to start with low-hanging fruits, stuff that does not break your infrastructure to get the confidence, to build up the skills. On the other side, I think it's also important to have the long run in your mind, that this, what you're building, should not be just for 1 year, for 2 years. In the end, you want to have something that is sustainable, who is maintainable. But of course, you have to build up the skills. So it's kind of, how can I say? I think it's challenging to build up the skills and not build something that you have to completely redo, refactoring after 3 years. Maybe it's better to refactoring after 3 years than not have automation at all. But normally you start with low-hanging fruits, stuff that does not change your environment, troubleshooting, help tools. There's many stuff you can start.
Try to find a framework to help you make those tasks repeatable. So you have your scripts now. Now, turn them into Ansible playbooks or something like NSO, or even not about jobs. Progress up the stack, and then then you can even start adding even like a UI on top of it, so you can have a place for somebody that a repeated task that it's easy for them to just go in and maybe click a few things. I'm making a VLAN change. They can go into a web interface and make that change, and then just I guess it's figuring out the progression and see what tools are out there and what tools fit in your environment, and just again start making all those tasks repeatable and easily repeatable, and something you can hand off to somebody. They don't have to understand how the underlying software works, but they know how to use the software.
Yeah, I think another thing to add to that is one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to customers about is it's not only making your code reusable, right? But first of all, it needs to be off of the engineer's laptop. It doesn't do any good if there's one person in the organization who has a laptop full of scripts that are not consumable by others, right? And so building automation with the idea of reuse in mind, which is I'm going to write this once and share it with my team and let them consume these chunks of code in something larger. But it's also, how do I make my automation consumable? How do I make it so that the people that are going to request something of IT can go and request that and get it when they need it and how they need it, versus have to, automation on the other end of a ticket is okay, but you're still left with that human element of, do I like who sent the ticket into the queue, and am I going to pick it up, and am I going to work on it, versus this is an automated task and someone went to a service catalog or to a developer portal or whatever it may be, and they said, I need X, whatever that may be, and when they push the button, they get it. When you get to that level and you start to have that kind of mindset of, I'm writing this automation to release to someone to consume, I think that naturally kind of moves it up the stack, and gets people thinking about how I can really start to build a sustainable system of this as well.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate too that we need to have some questions from the audience. So here at like 15 after the hour, it would be really good. I might have to get the pitchforks out and muster some up one way or the other, so we're not just here expanding on our topics. So if you have any questions, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. You mentioned the stage of the evolution that a lot of people go through, starting with scripting and ending at CI/CD pipeline and full automation with service provisioning. The whole journey we understand. Do you think that the value that network operators get out of the different steps of the journey is linear, or do you think that it makes sense for some people to stop at some place? For example, when you go from ISSH everything to I do small Python scripts or small Ansible playbooks for everything, there's a massive amount of value in a very small amount of time. But then when you want to go to I CI/CD everything with a digital twin and testing, and before, that's a ton of work to get there. Do you think the value return is linear from your experience doing this, or do you think that it's so not linear that some people can stop in the middle because it makes the most sense for them?
I think the thing that I've seen is that you are right. Those quick wins, they pile up. You show a lot of value back to the business and the work that you're doing. People appreciate that. They understand why you're doing it. I think longer term, though, as you start to look at, and especially, so just very quick on my background, I work with the largest of the enterprise customers globally, right? We work with 80% of the Fortune 100. So this is kind of a different animal than maybe a lot of more mid-sized shops. But there is a dramatic reduction in risk that comes with as you start to move up the stack and implement those technologies, and it's test driven and it's test focused, and you're simulating change and doing full end-to-end validation. Those are things that in the large enterprises are really required. However, they don't focusing your efforts only on that will take away from those quick wins, right? So it's really about how do I stack them, how do I get moving up, and then at some point the business has to be all in on making that technology decision to do that. Generally, the reason people do it is they see what's happened, right? The reduction in outages, the human risk out of it, the number of maintenance windows being reduced, all of those benefits that everybody understands of automation start to come to fruition, and those are, it's just a longer road to get there, I guess.
I would also sort of add that, we shouldn't really think of CI/CD as this necessarily big hurdle that you have to jump over. Like, I find it very valuable on all my projects to just turn it on, even to do simple things. And simple things being like run linters, run code formatters, do simple checks. And some of that stuff is very low-hanging fruit that you can get. And I think one thing it adds that's really valuable there is it's converting what you're doing into a system, into a process, and you start thinking about it as a system and process. So even though linters and code auto formatters, these are very minor things, just the fact of turning them on and having a CI/CD process that people are getting visibility that oh, I make a change and I broke things and I see it. Even if it's very minor and sort of trivial things, I think that value is quite a bit for organizations. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, Brandon Bennett. I think you've touched on this a little bit around hiring, but I wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper into this and the fact that I think hiring for network automation, we're always looking for that unicorn, right? And I built my career off of this, woo, but it's also still very hard to find people that both know networking and know software practices. I guess there's two parts to this question, and I think you kind of already asked a little bit of or answered a little bit of this, which is, do you go after the network engineer and teach them software? Do you go after the software engineer and teach them networking? I think there's a further part to this that a lot of software engineers don't find this stuff interesting. Everybody's really following AI, ML, front end. How do you talk somebody who comes from the software engineer background into thinking that network automation is cool? And then how as a community do we help build that pipeline? I know CU's here, and CU's done a really great job, but they're one of 2 schools in the state that's actually concentrating on this. How do we get people into this, and how can we make it easier to hire good network automation software engineers?
Do you want to take that one, Urs, with some of your background with your university work?
Yeah, I think we have to make the network automation more sexy. So,
Yeah, that was not what I expected.
now it is, I see the point. Myself, I'm doing a master as a hobby in AI, but all the stuff comes together and everything bases on the network, So without the network, nothing happens. So I think it's important that we, in the early stage, in the colleges, maybe bring this topic more up. And it is not like 20 years ago that we have box by box. Now this is a whole ecosystem. It is really interesting. We can, of course, bring all the keywords with AI and all the stuff also to the network. So I think we should try to get the talent really early and then build up the skills. Something that really helped myself is pair programming with a software engineer. I, as a network engineer, that was the time I learned the most. When I really was day by day with a software engineer. He had no idea from network. I had no idea from software engineering. It's really dramatic. We both had, of course, knowledges from each other. But yeah, I think we have to make it sexy again.
Thanks.
I mean, luckily, I think AI is going to be a big part of what we do, and I think we can attract people that way as well. I mean, our networks generate troves of information that can be mined and we can learn on, and we can make predictive analysis. But I can predict when a line card's going to fail based on previous events. So like I think there's just opportunities there, and we just have to, like Urs said, we have to be able to present it and sell it and track the right people.
And so Nick, I'll ask this part to you because it relates to that. So it seems like you've done a lot of community-related things to get people into automation. What are some of those community things that we could also be doing?
Yeah, I think meetups are one of the best ways, right? Not only from if you have them in your area to attend them, but also present at them, right? When we talk about getting people excited about doing this, you have to make it exciting for them and make them want to learn it. And I think giving back to the community through meetups and through presentations at conferences and all of those things is a great way to do that. I also think that one of the things that kind of an inflection point was actually when Cisco had launched the DevNet certifications, right? We saw a massive uptick in people that all of a sudden were excited about automation again. And I think what it has to be is it has to be relatable to whoever is kind of showing interest in it, right? When I look at kind of back in February, leading up to February of 2020 when those certifications came out, internally at Worldwide, we had done internal study groups to prep and get ready for those exams. But along the way, all of the content that we built allowed us to start to do, boot camps, and boot camp's probably the wrong word, but study groups of teaching people the base technologies and why it mattered to them and why, as a network engineer, this is going to be the future. And doing that in a manner that is digestible is really big too, because I think if you look at automation as a whole, it's kind of overwhelming, right? So you have to start to make it consumable so that as you get those either younger in career network engineers or even the people that have been doing it for 25 years excited about it, they have to see the value in it for themselves and their career. And once you start to do that, you'll start to see that grow. I think it's going to longer term be one of those things that the way we interface with networks is going to change, but the AI side especially, I think, it's going to drive a lot. I think because we'll see people starting to realize that it's going to be cool again to kind of do networking. I think as a lot of those technologies get applied to the network world too.
I always thought it was cool.
Yeah, I think maybe.
Oh, go ahead.
Many companies have really nice automation stuff doing, but they always say it's confidential, it's internal, I cannot share this. Maybe something we should change is to be more proud of what we actually do, what we accomplished, and show it, sell our work much better.
Go ahead.
So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but when I talk to DevOps, I do a lot of customer research. I find out they're usually so busy just keeping the lights on that spending the time, the strategic time to implement automation is just not what they have time for, or they've tried these sorts of tools and have usually not seen the returns that they wanted to. So how do you typically get people past the point of just thinking tactically and thinking more strategically about these sorts of things? I stumped you?
Get lucky? No. I mean, one, if you don't have to keep the lights on if the lights are automated. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, internally, it's just persistence and just constantly trying to sell it. It took us a while to get there, and it was just, constantly, talking about, the advantages of automation, but also a lot of, risk mitigation with automation and presenting it that way. And I think that especially helped for our leadership, that we have less risk in the network if we know that our configuration is consistent. Our engineers are not going to make simple mistakes because they're copying a flawed Golan template around the network. And that got us there. So, it's just a lot of evangelizing. And just keep doing it. And, it's unfortunately also means maybe hopefully sometimes just having the cycles in a few people that, do a few little projects and just be able to constantly show that. So, and hopefully, I think events like this are great because we start to see that everybody is doing this. And, eventually some companies will come around and management will come around because they'll see, well, their competitors are doing it. So they're going to have to do this as well to stay competitive.
And I know this is slightly different than the question that the person was asking, but so with Fabric, right, that's been a very successful line of business for Equinix, and you didn't have much problems getting management buy-in on doing that product, or how did that sort of work on your guys' side?
Right, because to Urs' point, that is our product, so it is the center of what we do, and network automation is really the center of what we do. But I think that even if not, there is data out there, and there is ways that you can prove the value, and everything is really goes back to what helps benefit your customers and what helps you sell more of your products. So, and automation definitely contributes to that because it contributes to a quality product. It's faster. It really contributes to your CI/CD efforts as well because you can turn things around quicker.
All right, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for doing this. My question is, are your network rollouts multi-vendor, which I assume they are? Love to hear you guys talk about how you've overcome challenges related to that. And also, if you could change one thing and force everybody to do it the same way, what would be the first thing you'd change? Thanks.
So let's start with the multi-vendor part of that question first. If anybody?
Yes. Yeah, we're multi-vendor. So yeah, and we'll actually we use Cisco NSO as our orchestration automation engine, and it supports multi-vendor. But yeah, so we have 3 different vendors in our network currently, and yeah, it's been a fun experience. But it does work, but there are definitely challenges. If I'd change one thing, I'd want all vendors to support Yang and NetConf fully. For every part of their device.
And how about you, Nick, on the multi-vendor part?
Yeah, we do a ton of multi-vendor, both in our own network, in our labs, with our customers. I think for us, generally, it's how do we abstract the data in a manner that it becomes vendor agnostic. So we don't do a lot of Yang or NetConf or RESTConf, thankfully, but for us, it's how do we build and define and design those data models, store that data in a way that it's consumable, right? And then from there, let the automation consume that data and talk to those devices, whether it's via Python or Ansible or Terraform, whatever it may be. There are challenges with all of it because as much as we wish every OEM did things the same way, they don't, right? So sadly, the biggest level of effort in a lot of this is just that upfront design and thinking about the things that you need to do to be successful, and know that it's okay to fail and fail fast and iterate and get back to work and make those changes as necessary as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if there is a way for you to quantify maybe 1 or 2 attributes of the most successful automation projects. Is it when the firm is committed to using it to productize? Is it when it's greenfield, when they spend a lot of money? Things like that.
So to try to make this more specific, for your organizations or for your customers, what were the things that you saw that made it successful, assuming you thought it was successful?
First thing is enterprise buy-in, right? Getting people on board with that idea that we're going to go automate this thing, whatever it may be, and have the visibility that it's going to happen and that it's going to change the way that the infrastructure is built and run, right? Without that buy-in, this kind of goes back to one of the earlier questions. If you don't have that executive level buy-in or that middle tier management buy-in, a lot of times these programs and these capabilities die on the vine. And the other thing is organizations that are focusing and spending efforts on use cases to benefit others, right? So back to making things consumable. The last thing we want to see is automation land as shelfware. Someone develops a use case, writes the automation, delivers the capability, and it goes unused, either because it's too hard to use, it's too hard to get set up because it's not consumable. All of those issues that go into that, at the end of the day, success is automation being written and used and iterated on, and the executives understanding that the level of investment that went into it is justified, and making sure that when you're building those things, you're tracking things like time savings and lead time drops and things like that, so that you can justify an ROI without having to go back and try to justify it after the fact as well.
So I think we have time for one more question, so let's do this one.
Sure. Anthony Nelson. One of the challenges I've had automating networks over the last decade plus is no matter where I go, there's a different data model, right? So how can we as an industry become more mature and have a common data model such that, all right, I don't have to train somebody in my data model, right? Because as soon as I hire somebody, I've got to train them on how we're doing it, or when they go to the next place, how they're doing it, right? So that's what I'm really looking for, is how can we increase our maturity in the intent of what we're trying to do, not just the scripts or the automation platform that we're deploying.
So I'm going to reframe the question slightly. So do people on the panel sort of think that we are going to have a common data model? I'm fairly skeptical that that will ever exist. So much more of the premise that we need to live with vendors are going to do things different way, and we need to deal with it. But I want to hear what people sort of have to think on that area.
1 minute, please.
Yep, 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Kirk more than anything here. I don't think we're going to get there. I think we can get close. I think we can have models we share and we collaborate on. It's how I usually compare it to people is many times I don't go and get somebody's Ansible playbook and run it as is. I get it and I have to tweak it a little bit. So our models are going to be different. I mentioned our colleagues at ESNet. We both have been on the same kind of journey, and with a lot of the same software products, our models are extremely different. We did things different ways. But in the end, our networks still operate very similarly. They pass packets, and it works. And so, unfortunately, I think you're always going to have this realm of, your models are going to be different. I mean, OpenConfig exists, but guess what? I can't use it, and most folks can't use it as is. So, I guess I'm skeptical we're going to get there.
All right, if everybody could give the panelists a round of applause.